So it is, I heard it's been a good day, kind of a long day, I'm sure. So my name is Jennifer Larson. I am a pediatric neuropsychologist at Michigan Medicine. And I am here really to kind of jumpstart and hopefully lead a discussion. And it's in part relevant to what was kind of discussed this morning with Janice Fialka and her always wonderful conversation about the partnership between providers and families. Because it is a partnership, it is a dance. There is a lot of give and take in any of these relationships. And as a neuropsychologist, I do a lot of standardized testing. I do a lot of diagnosing, labeling, for lack of better words. There are a lot of pieces that go into that. And there are a lot of ways that I think that can be exceptionally therapeutic for families. And there are also ways that it cannot be therapeutic for families. And so I think I just kind of want to start off by opening the door to kind of a conversation about kind of what your thoughts were about the presentation this morning. If any of you guys are providers working with kids or families, kind of how is it for you guys, and how do you meet a family where they're at and kind of know how much to give, how much to take, how much and when to say things and when not to. And then also, if you're not a provider, if you're a family member, just kind of what your experience is on that side. And we don't have to stick within that exact arena, but just anything that you guys, could think about or want to contribute. I'm just going to open it up to start there. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So I'm not a provider, but I am someone who is disabled, and my experiences working with providers when I have had a difference in opinion about my care treatment or the things are progressing was, I think you're going through an episode, just take more medicine, just shut up and take the pills. I'm not anti-medication, but at that point I realized now I need to find a new psychiatrist who, will refer me out for neuropsych testing and all of that. And I believe in medicine. I think doctors do a wonderful job. I know all medical professionals are terribly overtaxed, understaffed, under-resourced, but I feel like an individual knows themselves, even if they don't have the words, the scientific or the medical jargon, they and their families know something is wrong. And I kept journals, I kept every paperwork from every doctor's appointment. So I sometimes wish providers would listen to that, intuition, because I don't want to be difficult for a provider. I want to be, I want to not an easy patient, but I want us to have a good working relationship. But it's unfortunate when you become just another case number and someone just to sign off more prescriptions for.
I think that is a really good insight. One thing that I'm a provider, I'm a parent of a kiddo who, has a disability, and all of these pieces, it is important, I think, to recognize that people know themselves, parents know their children, right? And as a provider, you're getting like a sample, you're getting just a little snippet of, the behavior in clinic. All I know is that my children are hot messes whenever we go to a clinic, and it's like, I promise this is not how they normally are, those kinds of things, or they're silent and don't say anything. I'm like, that's also not how they are. So, finding like how somebody acts in a clinic, or kind of being able to use that experience and be a good listener and hear, the person that you're working with. And I appreciate that.
I was going to say, as a provider, I've seen it modeled for me, and so I now realize that I do it as well, of reassuring families before an assessment that like we will do a gut check at the end to say, like, we know this is the snapshot in time. Like, do you feel like the things that I saw today are typical of what you see? Is the way that they interact and engage me and play with me is how they do with other people? Because we, in the medical field, wanted to say like, we did it, let's give it a diagnosis and let's
Yeah.
move on. But if it didn't go well, then I'd rather say to the family, let's wait, let's see you back again. It's okay to say we didn't come to like a pretty conclusion and tied it in a bow and said, this is it. There's an opportunity to come back and do more and gather more and discover more. And so I do try to do that now, like, let's do our gut check. And it's okay to say, let's wait and keep this relationship going.
Yeah, and I think that's a big key component, right? Is you are a part of a relationship now. And there are many ways that you can very promptly shut that relationship down and not hear and not encourage more of a conversation. Because I think one thing that I think is really important is that as you are working with somebody and hopefully that you're experiencing as a family member, that it is a conversation, right? It should not be a clinician dictating or, just kind of shoving information out there, but it should be a conversation and there should be room to query, room to say that doesn't quite fit, or wow, that is the person, that is my kid that you're talking about. I think one thing within standardized tests that, kind of can very quickly go awry is, right, they're standardized tests. You are following a very specific protocol, and that specific protocol doesn't work for everybody, but it is a standardized test, so you have to follow the protocol. I think one of my most favorite quotes from kind of one of the moms of neuropsychology, Edith Kaplan, she uses a very process-based approach. And one of my favorite quotes from her was the child who does really poorly on the block design or earns the same score as the child who eats the blocks on the block design, right? And those are very distinctly different processes, right? To know, somebody had a really hard time doing this versus somebody ate them, right? But there's still a 0 or a 1, which is a very different way to think about those test scores. Other thoughts?
I'm so sorry. If you could repeat the initial question, I think I just got a little like fog brained after lunch, but.
Yeah, no, the question was pretty broad. Really just, as you're thinking about either being a provider or a family member, just kind of how, kind of your experience of this morning's lecture kind of conversation, about it being a partnership, about it being a relationship. So it's pretty vague, pretty open.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I think the one thing that really resonated with me is I've spent my entire life in some form working with kids in some aspect. And I think the speaker this morning, it was kind of like, and nobody's ever said it, I think. So I kind of was like, oh, there's my aha today. But it's not always about the bad things that are happening, right? The things that, the diagnoses, the words, the big words. Sometimes you can just say to a parent, like, hey, listen, this is what your condition. And then after you build that rapport, it's okay to go in and give them the words that you need to give them. But sometimes it's just about making mention of the positive.
Mm-hmm.
So like in my practice right now, I'm working in a psychiatric hospital on the kids unit. So it's hard every day. And so when you're calling these parents, the psychiatrists are calling them, they're like, these are your big diagnoses, right? It's all these big words. And so sometimes I'll just do a check-in and say, hey, like your kid participated in group today. They gave me some good feedback. Like, I'm really proud of what they did today. And it's like so many times I've heard, thank you for that. Like, it's not all about the diagnosis, it's about the positive too, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how I do my job.
I think that's great. It's figuring out how, I think the knowing the where and the when, kind of what your give and take is. Also, like sometimes parents are not needing to hear all of the things.
Right.
But hearing that positive hearing kind of what is going well is can go a long way.
So I did write a list, but I'm only gonna touch on two. It's oftentimes I am a parent. Providers will come in the room and not acknowledge the patient first. Like they're automatically going and talk to the parent, but we're here like for the patient. So, saying, hi, how are you? And introducing yourself. I think sometimes that could make our kiddos feel more comfortable, more welcoming into the atmosphere. And also explaining things in a way that families are able to, understand. Like, you can say the nephrologist, just say kidney specialist, because people are like, okay, like it freaks them out. Oh, what is that? It could be just something, as simple, like just making the environment feel welcoming, warming, and understanding.
I love that. I think language is so key. And also a lot of people then won't say, what is a nephrologist? Like, okay, great, but it's like, unless you're speaking the same language, nothing is gonna change, right? I think one thing on the language piece, that was one other piece that I wanted to bring up and talk about today, is that as a provider, working with families, working with kids, it's really important to be attuned to what you're saying and how you're saying it. One thing I learned the very hard way is I was a trainee, I was a fellow, and the diagnosis had just changed from mental retardation to intellectual disability. And so, my mentors were like, we got it, this is our shift, this is what we're saying now. And so, I was giving my feedback, and it's a really hard diagnosis to give. Sometimes it's less hard because the family's there with you and they see it, you see it. But, so I was going through this whole thing that I practiced because I was really nervous. And, so your child, has an intellectual disability and blah, blah, blah. I kept going. And then I paused and the parents looked at me and then the dad said, oh my gosh, thank goodness he's not mentally retarded. And I was like, oh dear. So, I think even as we change our diagnostic language, that does not mean that the world keeps up with that, right? And so I think it's a really, really, really key piece to be able to make sure as a provider that you are meeting the family where they're at, that they're understanding how and what you're talking about. And, even if the guidelines say one thing, it is okay to explain it in a way that is going to meet the needs of the diagnosis, the family. So then I had to backtrack and actually explain that it was formerly known as mental retardation, and we now call it intellectual disability. And so even today, whenever I give that diagnosis, I still use I use all the words in order to help families understand where we're at and what we're talking about. I don't know if anybody else has had a similar experience before of just not kind of like that language piece. Yeah.
No, this is actually like a major discrepancy that happens in my family a lot. My mom still very much uses special needs as a term. I think it's still a very popular term with many people. I tend to prefer not to use the term, as I tend to go with whatever, people self-identify as, and I've seen the community tends to prefer not to use that term, so I decide not to use that term as well. But for example, we had Ashley come up today and she said that she's someone with special needs and she self-identifies as that. So there's this discrepancy that my family will kind of have of oh yeah, I just talked to somebody with special needs. I'm like, well, did they identify with special needs, or did they identify as neurodivergent? Did they identify as autistic, or and it's kind of that game of, we need to all speak the same language and make sure that we understand, but how are we also that very fine line of also not using the incorrect terminology that will make somebody, feel attacked possibly.
Yeah.
I just want to uplift what he had just mentioned, because I wasn't even really thinking about it until you said that. With my forms for clients I asked them how they identify, how they would prefer to be identified, because there are some autistic people who say, I'm, you know, that I'm a person with autism, I'm not autistic, or I don't have special needs, or some of them don't even identify as having a disability.
Yeah.
And having that kind of the being humble enough to take whatever they're gonna tell me, what they want, regardless of how I identify myself or how, you know, I'm growing with my son and how he wants to identify in other people. And then just meeting them with that grace of if they want to correct me, they absolutely can. But like I try to get ahead of it with just asking them straight up, like, what is the verbiage you use in your home? So I can also model that and I can be part of that with you.
I think that is an awesome like way to approach this because I mean, it was interesting. I was on a dissertation committee and the candidate provided, she wrote her dissertation was on autism. And she actually gave a lovely blurb to the committee beforehand because she chose to use the word autistic in her paper. And so she provided some really lovely resources about, you know, because I think we would have said, hey, let's change this to person with autism, you know, person first identity, those kinds of things. But there is so much discrepancy in the communities, right? Of how folks identify, and it doesn't, I don't think it, one size does not fit everybody, right? And so figuring out just asking that question. And also I would really encourage you guys in here to think about, right, if something doesn't sit well with you, I think it's like, hopefully this is a safe space where you're like, hey, like that doesn't sit well with me. I prefer this, or how can you help me understand why you said it that way? Because I don't think that there's any malicious intent of anybody, right, when we're trying to talk to people. But it's helping to understand how people identify, and it's really hard because we don't walk around with a name tag that explains everything on our shirt, right? Do you have something?
I know you were asking about the question about how this,
Yeah.
you know, pours over into the professional one. But for the professional, I think this is really important because I started a new job as a mental health therapist. So my job is assessing for risk, safety risk. So that can feel really intense when you're asking about SI, suicide, or, you know, anything like that. So thinking of it like that, because parents are feeling they're sad. They're sad that their child is experiencing that. They're sad that they don't know how to help. There's so much that is going on, so many emotions, and everything is happening really fast. Like I saw a kiddo who was autistic, and it was that thing about what was said about wishing your disability away. He literally said that. If I weren't autistic, if my brain would work, if I weren't this, then I would be able to manage this, because he was being assessed through us for safety risks, but he was taken over to like one of the youth centers in the area or whatever. But this is really important because you think about it as like, this is a dance, and how I interact with this person from the moment they walk through the door, or I go in the room and greet them and start talking to them about inpatient and all of the things that are available, and being a new person. Like I'm just trying to grasp. I'm trying to catch on. I'm learning. I'm asking all of the things, to the point where I'm like, oh, let me just stop asking so many questions, because I asked somebody something last night, and she was like, we absolutely are supposed to do that. So just do that. I was like, okay, so I'll just do it. Well, she's like, I'm sorry, we just forgot. We don't do it. I just forgot to do it. I apologize. But I'm like, okay. So like there's some disconnect.
Yeah.
But I think this fills the gap for sure when you are working with families and things are heavy, because it's intense. You're walking in there, you're trying to help somebody navigate a situation that's tough for them because somebody is saying, I don't want to be alive, or like it can be, and it's anybody.
I mean, you're meeting people in hard moments.
Yes.
Very, very hard moments. And, in many, I think about the lollipop video, right? I mean, like, you never know what's going to stick, right? You never know what's gonna be grasped onto. And also, sometimes the information, the one thing that I often tell parents is like, your kid is the same kid that came in today, that is going to leave today. Like, even though I now have given X, Y, and Z diagnosis or whatever, it's still the same kid. Nothing has changed. And I think that it is scary for parents. It's scary, like I've been there. It's a scary thing. And so how do you help parents feel like you're on their side and you for them?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think, I'm gonna definitely dive into this book.
Mm-hmm.
So it can help me, especially in a new thing that's very new to me, and navigating those very quick relationships and turnovers with the families.
Yeah,
So
certainly. Did you?
So I want to kind of go back to the conversation on language, and like two experiences that I had were impactful. So when I was first diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I came through POA of like in like a 72-hour hole. And so obviously you don't get a full diagnosis. You're gonna have to follow up with a psychiatrist. But the piece of paper I was handed had 3 words on it, and it said hysteric and unspecified personality disorder. And I'm like, so what am I supposed to do with that? Like, am I going to the Arkham Asylum? Am I gonna be able to go back to school? Like, what? Like, I was like, is that really me? I was like, I thought I was cool, calm, and collected. I thought I colored nicely and contributed to group and did yoga. It was non-problematic while I was an inpatient. Like, I was like, well, dang. So that, like, and that stuck with me because when like I saw help for my chronic illness, that was brought up again by a cardiologist. Oh, she has a history of hysteria, so there can't be anything wrong. But then I think about conversations I have with my mom because I was diagnosed with autism when I was 22. So the language, used now, my mom will tell people, well, she has mild autism. And I'm like, that's not, I think. I think what my mom means to say is I have ASD level 1, so I have low or lower support needs. But saying I have like it's still autism, whether you have high support needs or low support needs. So working with the family, and using language like I use person first and identity first language interchangeably to really solidify, because I know my mom doesn't come from a place of harm. She just does not know how to compare my autistic experience to other people who might have higher support needs or have different behaviors or different levels of behaviors. So I think it really starts at home and having conversations with people who understand, and just providers. I know like in an inpatient setting, there's so many people, there's quick turnover, but that really shapes how young people with disabilities think about themselves.
I think that's fair. It's very insightful. Any other comments? I have another thing I just wanted to bring up before we move on, but oh yeah.
During the talk this morning, there just was a very, or like my little aha moment was kind of just a sense of validation, because I am a sibling of like two, my brother and sister who both have autism. And though there's a lot of communication in terms of, how family members can support those with autism and such, there never was the conversation with me of like, it is okay to have a little bit of grief that you have a different relationship than your peers. And there was kind of this moment of like, wow, I didn't realize I held on to that for so long, that there was kind of like, and I love my siblings, of course, and I love the way that they are, but there was always this little bit of frustration of, I can't go to my older brother and be like, hey, I'm having relationship issues. Can I ask for your advice? Because he's never experienced that. Or I can't go to my little sister and be like, hey, you want to go like hang out at the mall or something? Just a very different. My parents and I would always say, yes, I'm the middle child, but in many ways, I'm the oldest sibling. And so there was this new, like, kind of just aha moment when we were discussing that, when, we were discussing about Emma and like her daughter and everything, that, oh, it's okay to actually feel that. It was nice to have that validated experience of, wow.
I love that. I think I feel like as a provider, siblings are oftentimes left out in the conversation, right? It's not always appropriate to bring sibs in. However, they are part of the family and they interact, and time is allocated differently. And, there's a lot there for siblings.
I was just gonna say in that same vein, like moms and dads, like I remember vividly being in a hospital room with my son when he was an infant, and I was so depressed and crying, and I was just at my limits. And the doctor saying, "How are you doing? Like, what's going on?" And maybe we should bring a social worker in here for a little bit and chat with you. Like, it is the whole family for sure.
It very much is, and I think, going back to, I think, Sharon, your picture of, put on your own oxygen mask first, right? And SIDS can't do that. But I do think that there is a big piece of family that is oftentimes missing, at least in a lot of the meetings that I have a lot of moms that come in with their kid. And the feedback, the mom is the one that's receiving the feedback. And it's like we're missing a lot of, just the broader family and caretaking unit. I don't know how our time is. I want to make sure I manage your time. Okay, I've got a few more minutes. The other thing that I really wanted to talk about, so sometimes I will do this kind of discussion following like usually Janice, and then there's also Abby Lloyd, who we're gonna meet next session. And so sometimes they're together and it makes it nice to have my conversation following that. But we're split this time, which is fine. And so one thing I just, I struggle with sometimes is I love, in an ideal world, Janice's experience. I think that being able to have, the opportunity to provide all of the resources, the opportunity to have a school program that has inclusion, being able to do all of those things is phenomenal. And I wish that that is something that I could give to all of my families. But I'm not able to do that with all of my families for lots of reasons. And, I think it's something where I have a lot of kind of feelings surrounding a lot of this. Because, when you hear that story and you hear all of the positive and most wonderful outcomes for Micah, it really can't be done if you don't have all of those resources. I'm gonna say can't, that's the wrong word. It's tough. It is tough to do if you don't have all of those resources. And so I think that this is just a conversation, working with families where, when we're thinking inclusion, but then also what can this family do in the context of their school system, in the context of their community, in the context of all of those pieces, and how do we help to get inclusion in school, in community, within kind of the environment that we're also constrained by to some degree. So just to kind of have that conversation, if anybody has any thoughts about that, or maybe felt that during the lecture, it was a lecture discussion.
And this could also tie in with what Casey was just presenting as well. After the talk this morning, I think I looked to Charlotte and I said, I wish every child could have a friendship circle.
Yes.
And that circle of support. And I had a family in like neonatal follow-up this week, former 24-weeker, she's now 3.5. And the second we said, I always open by just saying like, I have an idea of why we're here today, but like what are your, thoughts? Be like, and Dad just said, I'm nervous. Because they were told a year ago that like they were coming today to make the autism diagnosis and he was forward thinking and things. But the thing that came up was they live in a very rural area. She's one of 2 kids in a special education classroom, doesn't have a lot of family support. And so when he was talking about social opportunities, he's like, we just don't have that. We both work jobs and things. And so I thought that immediately of like, this was a family who would so benefit from something like a circle of support moving forward, because the things that they were nervous about was, is she going to get married? Is she going to have a family? All of these big future thinking ideas, which is great. But wouldn't it be great if there was a group that was going to follow along with her?
Your neighbor.
So when I think of social circles of support, like back to what Casey's talking about, there's also other underlying issues when we talk about issues of race and gender. When I graduated from Michigan State University in my major in 2023, I was the only Black woman in my graduating class. So I had gone, I think between first grade and 12th grade, I had no Black women teachers or barely even Black teachers at all. So when you are in school environments, work environments where there are disabled people, but they don't look like you, or they are perpetuating, misogyny or being racist, that's not helpful. So when I was in college, I kind of shied away from a lot of disability groups on campus because they didn't seem to understand that I was a Black woman and that there were different experiences I was having on top of ableism, and kind of graduating college and be able to create that circle of friends through people I've met through advocacy work and people in my sorority. And I think the most beautiful thing about my circle of support is everyone knows I am disabled. I do presentations on it. I talk about it a lot. I was talking to my pledge mom, and she says, you know what? Sometimes I forget you're autistic because you're just Charlotte. So to them, I am not, hysteric on, all this and that. I am just me. I'm a sister to them. I'm a friend. I'm a part of the community. So finding that in adulthood when I struggled to find that in my teens and early 20s has made so much of the difference. But it can't go unsaid that there are groups that will struggle because of internalized stigma in the community and because of, other isms that are playing in our society, unfortunately.
Certainly.
Um, I wanna add to what Charlotte, just stated as far as a sense of belonging. And not having, the proper resources, especially in those underserved communities. Like, parents are really, really struggling to find resources. And then it taps into that age of, I'm gonna say 0 to 3. Like, I believe statistics here in Michigan said it's like 96.3% of children who don't receive those early intervention services. So that's another, impact that we are seeing. And I say it's just not a systemic, like it's just not a race thing. It's like all around. So when you think about me, when I think about the school system, I think about the school that just shut, Pine Tree Elementary that closed in Lake Oregon. Like, how unfair, was that? What support did that, area, receive? Now what's going on with the Detroit Public School community district? They taking the kids back to the least restrictive environment. So it's kind of like the laws, like they don't govern around that. And to Zach's point, when we were talking earlier, he was saying that Michigan, like every state has a different set of rules. So it's kind of like, how do I navigate? Like, how do I get through our ecosystem? In which my answer is our ecosystem is broken.
Yeah.
Thank God for cohorts like Lynn, because you all, like, we are trying to bridge those gaps and, bring awareness to everything. But we're doing a good job, but it's still, more that needs to be done.
Yeah, it is a very, very long road. And I mean, we were just chatting about how hard it is to find resources, even if if you're in the resource community, it's like, well, I still have a hard time finding a therapist for my kid, right? And it's like, why is it so hard? And I know all the navigations, but it's still really challenging. So I can't even imagine not having that added knowledge and then being able to access that. So it's a lot. This is a big conversation that we're not going to solve right here. But I think it's just, important to kind of think about what all goes into those really, 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 really good outcomes sometimes. And, like, it would just be wonderful if we can, wave our wand and it would all be good for everybody, right? But we live in an environment that is constricted by lots and lots and lots of things. Did you have something to add?
No, I just wanted to continue on with like the whole circle of support thing and that development that really contributes towards the resources that you have. Those individuals branch and branch and branch,
Yeah.
and you can find more and more. And so for my brother, for the longest time, he did have that, like in like in middle school and high school, he did have like those friends and those were nice branches. But I feel like there's also sometimes a little bit of a lack of our ability that, once my brother's now 26 and he's very much out of the education system, he doesn't really have any of those things. And he is at the point where, he doesn't really have as many acquaintances that we can make. We see that in adulthood for everyone, right? We get into the job world and then maybe we're not interacting with as many people anymore. And so he doesn't really have that ability to create his circle of support, especially now that he doesn't really have, my brother is like somewhat non-speaking as well. And so for him, it's not really possible for him to create that. School helped initiate that. Now there's no initiation step. So there's like this little concern for me for him, but also just for older adults and as they get towards that age, how do you create that circle of support? How do you find those resources? Because even the family members, the supports around them can't always be doing the initiating to do that. And especially if you can't advocate for that, it's really difficult.
It is, and I mean, I'm in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, and there's a lot of research that follows like cerebral palsy, folks with cerebral palsy as they age, and how that window of like physical health and all of these pieces start to narrow, which then increases the risks of your, cardiovascular and all of the health related risks, diabetes and everything. And there is this kind of, balance is not the right word, but there is this piece of how that becomes isolating, right? And how that social window narrows, and then it affects lots of other pieces as well. And the community is not really set up for that. I know like MSU has the most amazing adaptive complex. And I wish that other places could have that, because I think that having those resources for folks that have physical disability or other disability to access is really, really important. So any other last kind of comments? I want to make sure that we can transition into the leadership talk here in just a minute. But I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and being able to have this discussion. I think this is clearly not the end of this discussion, but I think it's a starting point to kind of get you guys thinking about all of the roles that we play and kind of how we can help the folks that we work with.